mind, just your perspective on the importance of the offensive line positions, but that might be a topic for another day. Today we talk extensively about player acquisition, bringing players in, making your roster better. But there's another side of it. There's losing a lot of players. There's two programs in particular. Kentucky already losing 18 players to the portal. Again, this is day one of the winter transfer portal window. LSU, another school, losing 11 players. I think I know what you're going to say when I ask you from a general manager, how do you prepare for this? And you should have said, you should have been prepared for this. But what goes through your mind when you start to see that door just swinging open and players leaving?
I coined the phrase a few years ago, the portal giveth and the portal taketh away.
It does.
So 18 guys leaving or 11 guys leaving, or you're the one asking them to leave? Because if you are asking them to leave, you have a plan to replace them. And we all know that this 105 numbers is coming up. And if those players that are leaving Kentucky or LSU haven't developed, if you have dead money in them, meaning you've paid them a ton of money as young guys, and they haven't showed up and performed, well, if this year 2 or 3, the likelihood of them being able to be productive year 3 to 4, not likely. So you cut your losses and say, you know what? We've done a good enough job in evaluating the, let's say, guard position. And there are 10 guys at this position that elevate us over the 2 guys that we're losing there. And we feel comfortable enough by saying, hey, listen, you're not going to have an opportunity to play here. So it's your best interest if you look for somewhere to play. And most of the guys got agents, runners that's doing the job for them already. And the laziest thing to do in recruiting is somebody to drop them off at your desk and say, hey, listen, he has a lot of potential and he can play. Why didn't he play at the last spot? But that's their problem, not ours.
You mentioned rev share. There's a big change that's going to be coming through college football with the House settlement, and it's not just the revenue share and the potential 20 million-ish cap that we're going to see, because that's a whole other issue, is dealing with how to manage your roster from a financial standpoint. But from a numbers standpoint, this 105 roster number, scholarship max limit, whatever you want to call it, how does that affect the way that we're already seeing the transfer portal this year, before it even has come into effect? How does that already affect things right now?
Well, it takes away the developmental part of your team in the middle to back end third of your team. Now you have to look at it and say, how am I constructing my 3s or my 2s? Before, you could say, let's give these guys 2 years as the 3s to get prepared and get developed. Now you have to look at your 3s as backups. And your 2s is low-end starters. Because at the end of the day, you might lose some of your 3s that are really good in the next year. But those next guys have to bump up. So it's always pushing your roster. How are you developing your roster in terms of developmental guys or guys that can play right now, older veteran guys, and pushing those middle-tier guys up to push those starters up in order to play? So what are you going to do to construct your roster moving forward? I would go veteran over the developmental high school guy, because I don't have the time, nor do I have the resources to do it.
So you're going to have to sacrifice on some of the developmental guys because that limit is getting smaller?
Correct. You don't have that. You can't run with the 3s anymore and say, you know what, we want to go with the 3s versus the 1s. There are no more 3s. Your 3s are really 2s, and your 2s are really 1s.
And you need production from all of them all the time.
You need all of those guys to play now. You can't wait on
There's not a practice squad. Or
You can't wait on a high school guy to play in 3 years because there's dead money, and that roster spot needs to be filled. And within that roster spot, I need production out of it. What production am I getting out of you? If you're on the bench, sideline, or you're a 260-pound offensive lineman that we can't get up to 310. How long can I wait for that? Not long, when I have put money in you and there's a limited roster spot and I can't get anything else.
So where does that complicate things for a general manager? Because, you might look at it and say, well, that's a smaller number that you have to put together, but you've got to get it right.
Well, this is where you have to have vertical alignment within your organization. What I mean by that is your head coach, general manager, and all the position coaches should be able to line up and say, this is what we want out of our program. So if you go in and you say, head coach, we have to have a plan to get all of our 3-wave offensive linemen ready to play next year. And we have to take off a lot of reps off of them during practice and find a way to get them into the game. Well, you got to go out and go into the portal. And you got to go get guys in the portal that's played. So they have the ability to get ready to play for you and not take up that roster spot that was given to a high school kid.
Yeah.
That maybe you're crossing your finger like, oh my God,
One day could
one
be
day,
great. Yep.
diamond in the rough, you
Yeah.
need a diamond shining on your fingers.
Exactly. Yeah, it's less room for error, and you can't take as many chances, which is a bummer because this is a developmental game, and it still is. I mean, you still need to develop guys that come into your program, but you have to be a little bit more selective with them. I want to bring on somebody else into this conversation, our national college football writer, John Talty. So, John, we have a former general manager, and we have you, somebody who speaks with general managers and people within programs. How have you seen the transfer portal change the way that they do, I guess we'll call it the business of college football in 2024?
Yeah, I was loving listening to Smoke there. I feel like he was nailing
Right?
it. I think it impacts a few different things. One, I think what we're seeing, let's look at this college football playoff right now, what Indiana's done, what Arizona State's done. I think it speeds up your timeline. I think the ability to bring in, quite a few different players, if necessary, to churn out multiple different players as well, allows potentially you to turn over your roster a lot faster than you would have been able to in the past. And so you're seeing those, huge success stories, and that, the part of the impact of that is it puts pressure on other people. There's not quite as long of a runway as you used to have. You're not getting 5 years to get it figured out. If you don't have it figured out by 3 years, you might be looking for a new job. And so I think that's one of the both positive and negative impacts of it, is that it just allows you to change your roster so much more. But it also, there's just a lot of things that you have to deal with now that you didn't have to, 5-10 years ago. And portal, NIL, all those things are really intertwined, that are having, a huge impact on the sport in a multitude of different ways.
Do you see an added pressure, Smoke, when it comes to, you see like what Kurt Cignetti did at Indiana, for example, turning that program around immediately?
The added pressure comes in to not understanding what the objection is when you first get hired as a head coach. Mm-hmm. Because you can have a 5-year plan, and within 2 minutes your AD walks out and says, hey, listen, I just saw Indiana win 11 games. Why can't we
What's
do
your
that?
excuse?
What's
Yeah.
your excuse? So the pressure is really on
Right.
position coaches to develop their team, but also administration raising enough money to get those players in that can give you that day one impact.
Yeah, and speaking of raising enough money, John, I'm sure that you've been tracking this constantly with what could be coming down with the House settlement and rev share, and we've talked about the scholarship limit maximum to 105. What have you been told in terms of people working within the college football programs, how this is affecting this transfer portal window right now before it's even gone into effect?
Well, there's a lot of money flying around right now, and I think there's also a lot of huge demands flying around right now. I'm sure, Smoke, you know that too. I mean, I was talking to people before jumping on here, and you're hearing guys who marginal starters asking for high 6 figures, even into 7 figures, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, that's kind of wild to me right now, but there's a lot of potential money at play, especially as schools move to rev share. And I think that there's an opportunity for, this group of guys who are available in the market to capitalize on that. Now, I think over time, as this moves even more and more to a professional model, when you hire smart people like Smoke into your personnel department, we'll see those numbers, I think, get more in line. I think there'll be a market correction as time goes on, as schools get used to working within a budget and really moving more toward, I think, kind of an NFL model of their salary cap in quotes. It's not a full cap, but that's kind of how I think teams are already kind of gearing around it. But right now it's, for some of these schools that maybe didn't have huge NIL money to work with in the past, this is an opportunity to have quite a bit more money to devote toward your football program. And so that's why you're seeing, some big money fly around right now, and some talented guys going into the portal knowing that they'll get a big payday on the other side.
So we're finally seeing somewhat of a leveling of the playing field, as people like to call it. It's hard to tell this year with the college football playoff expanding, so automatically more teams are going to get in. But it seemed like maybe this was an intended consequence, but a positive consequence is that we've seen more distribution of talent. Is that what you've been tracking, John? Have you seen that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we're seeing it in the college football playoff field, in terms of some of the teams that made it. And I think that's the benefit, for a lot of programs is that, I go back to Alabama a lot. I know Smoke has ties there too. Like they were able to stack so much talent over the years, kind of behind the scenes that maybe weren't even playing, that come year 3, come year 4, those guys could then step in and be ready to rock. And it's just very hard to maintain those guys at this point. Georgia, I know, has gone through it. You're just seeing less depth, especially at the upper end of college football, because those guys, after a year or two, if they're not starting, even if they're not getting enough, catches, or if they're not getting enough time, even if they are starting, are moving on to other places. And that allows for, I think, more programs to be competitive. It also, I think, has led to, at least in my opinion, this year has felt like there are less great teams than I can remember in a while. It feels like everyone has flaws. Oregon's great, but I think they still have some issues. We've seen Ohio State, Georgia, Tennessee, you can go on down the line. All those teams feel like they have some issues. And I think that's in part because they just don't quite have the depth, or maybe they just weren't quite able to get a talented recruit or a kid at the portal to plug a spot, and they've got some holes along the way. It's been very hard to kind of build the super teams that we saw dominate the sport for so long in Bama and Georgia and some of those other programs.
Somebody who just roots for chaos, I appreciate this new age of college football, and I appreciate you, John Talty, for joining us here on Transfer Portal Palooza. I'm sure you've had a very busy day and will continue to in the postseason. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
I feel like we both nodded so intently when he said building depth. Why is it so much harder to build depth now than it has been in the past?
Because you can't hold on to those players anymore.
Yeah.
Because the depth players understand their value on the market. And even though they don't have that much value, because you're watching production over potential, there are agents and coaches that create that, just because most coaches run away from the resistance of teaching. And when you have a veteran that's been in college and they've played, say, 20% of the reps, you say, you know what, I don't have to teach that left tackle how to pass pro, how to run block, how to take on different stunts, how to get game day and game on the task type of experience. You can't pay for that.
Yeah.
So it's easy just to say, you know what, let me go comb that roster of the guys that's played the backup role. And maybe they can come in and start for us because we're at a lower level, or because our expectations not as high as going into the playoffs or winning the national championship. I just want to retain my job for 2 years and get to the bowl.
Yeah. Sounds like a pain to have to, coach these guys up and and use this reclamation project when I am scrolling 247sports.com and see, oh, this guy's available. I'll take him.
It's a juggling act.
Yeah.
And you have to be realistic of where you're at and who you're working for.
Yeah.
If you're at Louisville, you should not have the same expectation of saying Texas for a second-year coach, because A, the resources and the players aren't there. So you have to give that coach at Louisville a little bit more time and grace to get them up to the level of performance that you want. So it's a juggling act that you got to be real careful with.
Yeah.
And everybody got to be vertically aligned, like I said, and understand what you're asking for and what you're paying for at the end of the day.
College football fans are nothing if patient and graceful when it
Oh, they're
comes to
so patient.
I say that as a college football fan myself, so I'm not hating on the college football fans out there. We are all a little impatient when it comes to wanting to win. Let's hit some breaking news we have right now. Tulane quarterback Kai Horton entering the transfer portal. Spent the last